As a young girl, I spent lots of time at my grandmother's house. The Rogue Valley in Oregon often gets summer temperatures above 100 degrees. That may not sound much for us, but it is for them. Anyway, sometimes my grandmother would announce with glee, "Tonight we're having ice cream." Us kids would usually answer in unison, "Oh, what kind?" This irritated Nana no end. She'd say, "When I was a girl, we were just happy anytime you could have any ice cream." It was usually vanilla or strawberry, but who cares? It was ice cream, and we were so glad. Recently, I heard a story about a 2-year-old whose parents, like most of us, were starting to give him choices such as, and this sounds familiar, we just did this. Do you want this one, or do you want that one? Do you want a banana or an apple? But typical of 2-year-olds, his favorite word was no. So he said no to each. Without leaving his answer at just that, no, the parents, also typical of most parents, started scrambling around to see what other choices they could offer him. Now, I'm not here to tell you that having choices is a bad thing. That would be ridiculous. Being able to make choices about one's life is a great blessing and brings us the freedom, autonomy, and self-determination that is a hallmark of a good life. But too much of a good thing is still too much. I am acutely aware of the downside of having too many choices right now, as James and I have been choosing furniture, paint colors, solar tubes, new tile, contractors and installers, and numerous other decisions to get settled in our new house in Prescott. And I am acutely aware of how fortunate we are to even be able to buy a house in Prescott. So again, I am not saying that having options is a bad thing. In his book, The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, Barry Schwartz suggests that the cumulative effect of ever-increasing choices is overload and can cause substantial distress for many of us. And it's often the tyranny of all the small decisions that can get us to the point of feeling unable to manage, unable to cope. After several months of going over our data limit, last fall I decided to look into changing our phone company to T-Mobile. James had seen an ad saying people over 55 could get a simple plan for just $60. Yeah, right. I spent days comparing prices, comparing plans, talking to my techie son in San Diego, going several times to the Verizon store at Tempe Marketplace, stopping by the T-Mobile store on my way home from work and getting on a first-name basis with a helpful young salesperson there, looking up all our old Verizon statements, researching our family's past data usage, thinking about how much and where we are apt to travel, figuring out whether it made sense to keep the whole family on one plan, and then calculating into the whole equation that 2 of the 5 phones this family uses were still being paid for via monthly fees. In the end, I decided to switch, as we would eventually save a little money, but only if we stayed on the plan a while. And the cost of all that time and effort? Hours of research, annoying waits, confusing options, and marital stress. Then that nagging feeling that I had made the wrong decision. For since we've moved half time up to Prescott, we've realized that T-Mobile has terrible coverage there, despite the fact that right up the hill behind our house is a cell phone tower. Yikes! Too much of a good thing is still too much. In many aspects of my life, I am what Barry Schwartz calls a maximizer. Maximizers not only try to always make good decisions, they try to make the best decision ever. Not satisfied with finding the perfect sweater to wear at the Christmas party, they have to make sure that nothing else is more perfect. So even if they find a great one in the first store they go to, they have to check all the other stores and compare prices, fit, softness, color. And even after they buy it, they often still double-check their choice by stopping by one more store on their way home, and then perhaps going online to make sure they didn't miss something they hadn't considered that would be even better. Does this sound at all familiar? What Schwartz calls satisfiers, on the other hand, satisfiers, are people who are able to settle on something that is good enough and don't worry that there might be something better out there. This person does have criteria and standards, but looks just enough to find something that meets those standards, then stops. They may be as discriminating as a maximizer, but they look for the good or merely excellent and not the absolute best ever. And then they move on and are satisfied. Last week, for me, and James, I might add, it was all about tile. After looking at 5 different places in Prescott and taking samples home from 2 of them, nothing seemed just right. So, after preaching in Flagstaff last Sunday and spending nearly 5 hours on the road driving, I rushed out to East Mesa when I finally got back to check out more tile at Floor and Decor. Never mind that I had already checked the closer Floor and Decor the week before in Tempe. But it didn't have as many choices. So, after checking in Mesa, I brought 5 more tile samples I liked back up to Prescott to show James. He luckily agreed with my first choice, and I was ecstatic. Finally, we could move on to settling the paint choices. But wait! The tile installer who measured the floor a couple of days ago happened to mention one more tile store in Prescott Valley. So that very afternoon, off we went. Sermon writing be darned. There, we found one more tile we liked. Oh, actually, more than one, because we brought 2 more samples home. And finally, we thought we'd made a final decision, but oh no. Now we've found out we might be paying more than we should at the Prescott Valley store because we'd talked directly to the owner instead of going through a back channel contact that could have found us a better price. So this past Friday afternoon, we met that different person at one more store. Whew, we finally have our tile. Help! Is this freedom or is this tyranny? Too much of a good thing is too much. What is all the cost of this research, time, and effort? Confusion, doubt, anxiety, stress, hours off of one's life. Even when a decision is made, Schwartz says that the number of options we first considered before making the decision actually has a negative effect on our long-term satisfaction with the decision. Because among those alternative options are some really, really good qualities. And inevitably, some of those good qualities can't end up in the final choice. Because no one thing can have everything we could possibly want. We humans apparently measure the loss of something as worse than the gain of something. So we're thinking about all those lost opportunities. The negative emotions that come up when we compare and agonize and feel overwhelmed by all the various options make it really hard to make the best decision. And regrets of past decisions haunt us, especially close calls. How bad do you feel after running through an airport terminal, trying to make a connection, only to realize that the plane had left 30 minutes ago? But how much worse would you feel if you ran through the airport trying to make a connection, only to find out that the plane left just 5 minutes ago? If only you hadn't stopped for that drink of water. If only you had been in the front of the plane instead of the middle. If only, if only, if only. Did you know a bronze medalist is happier than a silver medalist? The silver medalist is haunted by feelings of, oh, so close. If only I'd tried a little harder. But the bronze medalist knows they were so close to not being on the podium. It's true, isn't it? We are also comparers. And the more options we have to compare, the less happy we are with whatever choice we might come up with. There are just that many more lost opportunities. We are great at imagining ideal scenarios and feel disappointed when they don't come true as imagined. And the more we compare, the more nothing or no one can ever measure up. And it's much, much worse if we feel responsible for the wrong decision, which we often do, whether or not it truly was all our own doing. Even trivial things like choosing a bad movie for the family to watch makes us just feel bad. Think about this example. If we're standing in a long line for something, it's annoying that maybe there's only one checkout person. That's annoying. But imagine if there are 2 long lines and you have to choose one and you end up choosing the wrong one. It's the slow one. So now, not only are you annoyed, but you start having regret. And then you start having blame. And who do you blame? Yourself for making a bad decision. And apparently, the more appealing our choices are and the greater they are, the more we tend to regret our decisions, no matter what they are. Being responsible for our own lives, of course, can be liberating. But too many opportunities add up to too many failures, for which we often blame no one but ourselves. When we feel we are responsible for every little result, it is a burden, even terrifying, even paralyzing. One example Schwartz gave hit a personal chord with me. Apparently, most people, something like over 80%, when asked to think about what they would do if they were diagnosed with cancer, would say, of course, they would want to be the ones to choose between different treatment options. But actually, a study shows that once diagnosed with cancer, most people want their doctor to make that decision. Having options gives us the burden of responsibility, and sometimes we really don't want that much responsibility. This really rings true for me because I remember with my late first husband when he was sick, feeling so relieved to know the outcome was not up to me. It wasn't up to me to hang on to hope and be optimistic no matter what, because otherwise something bad would happen. I knew I was not in control. I could be a care partner. I could be an advocate. You do have to be an advocate sometimes. I could be his cheerleader. But ultimately, it wasn't in my hands. And to me, that was a great relief. Otherwise, it's magical thinking, and we put so much pressure on ourselves for our lives and the lives of someone we love. Too much of a good thing is still too much. Perry Schwartz also wrote an article in the New York Times Magazine entitled, Is freedom just another word for many things to buy? He apparently counted 285 different packages of cookies, 75 different instant gravies, and 230 soup offerings in a rather modest neighborhood grocery store, and this was years ago. Every week, we are shoppers. We're also education consumers, healthcare consumers, beauty consumers, electronics consumers, utility consumers, even investment and retirement consumers, religious institution consumers. How many of you went church shopping before you came here? It's not a bad thing, but a little overwhelming. Was it the sermon you didn't like? The coffee? It gets overwhelming. And we bring a consumerist mentality even to our relationships, even to our life work, always wondering if we are getting the best deal. This isn't liberation. We are imprisoned by our things, by our options, by our thoughts, and by our regrets. Does having more make us happier? And does having greater choice equal greater happiness? I think not. Too many options exhaust the human psyche, leads to unreasonable expectations, and leaves us feeling often unfulfilled. When we have lots of options, it makes us more likely to question our decisions, even before we make them. Again, I say, yikes. But don't worry, I'm going to try to make sure we don't leave here feeling anxious, overwhelmed by daily life, and worried about all the decisions we have to make this coming week. In his Paradox of Choice book that I'm borrowing so much from, Schwartz suggests a number of things we can do. So here goes. Choose when to choose. Define your standards and don't worry about what else is out there that you don't even know about yet. Know yourself and decide what choices in life matter to you. Focus your time and energy there. And let all those other great opportunities just pass you by. Filtering out extra information is one of the basic functions of our minds. So use it. Embrace and appreciate things that are good enough. Know that this is saving time and saving energy, and in the end, your subjective feeling of what is good will make you happier than hours spent comparing and analyzing and then feeling dissatisfied with the final results, even if objectively you don't get the best choice. Learn to love constraints and view limits as liberating. Set yourself a few rules, standards, habits for at least some of your decisions. Stick to them, never worrying about changing your mind or making a different decision. Some examples probably come easy to us, like, I always wear a seatbelt. You don't get into your car and think, okay, shall I? Shall I not? You just do it. Or you could try this one. I always eat the green curry at Thai restaurants. See? Or I only check 2 stores when shopping. Stick to your favorite brands. Believe me, a new and improved thing will find you. You don't have to seek it out. So just try to stick there if you can. But this is a more serious one to think about. Stick with your chosen partner. Of course, the grass is always greener. That's a given. but just stop comparing, especially to what you think others have, or others get to do, or how others look. People who are happy don't usually have a habit of comparing themselves to others. They know themselves. After a negative experience, they usually just distract themselves with something else, maybe learn a few things from a mistake, but then they move on. Ruminating, regretting, those things are poisonous to the human psyche. Practice gratitude for what is good and for what you have. Know and even expect that the thrill of something new and shiny, whether it's a person or a thing, usually fades over time. When those pleasures eventually turn into mere comforts, count them as a blessing and something still to cherish. As Buddhism teaches us, control expectations. Be curious, open, leave room for serendipity, for surprise in life. Don't think about all those, what if, Appreciate those little things. Be relaxed. Feel settled. Feel at ease. Mind you, this is not easy for me to do. Finally, make decisions non-reversible whenever possible. We think we love stores with return policies. But in reality, unless we're extremely dissatisfied, we rarely return things. But knowing that we could have done so can keep nagging at us. The power of permanent decisions is especially clear in our most important choices. When the mind and the heart frames things in a positive manner, and we pour our energy into developing and improving our existing relationships, the joy, the comfort that we then get is incredibly powerful, even liberating. Too much of a good thing is. But what's my new mantra? Good enough. Please